Now, there are a few different methods of unit testing. For example, some of you may have a QA department that does the testing for you, and there's some advantages and disadvantages to having a QA department. The advantages are they can think of different things to test that maybe the developer doesn't think of. It can test their UI, because a lot of times it's very hard to write code to test the UI, so you kind of need a human at some point to test the UI for a lot of things. And there's usually less startup time or startup cost because the developer is not spending a lot of time developing unit tests. Now, the disadvantages, though, is regression testing is very time intensive. If you think about it, a human has to always go back and run the same stuff over and over again every time a new change is made. That can be very time consuming. The setup and teardown can also be time intensive. If the QA person has to set up a whole database, maybe move some test data in there, and then once he's done, he's got to tear that all down again, time intensive. And also, for a lot of QA people, this becomes very frustrating and very boring. So turnover in a QA department can be very high. What I'm presenting in this course is an automated way of testing. And again, there are advantages and disadvantages. The advantages being is once you write code to test other code, it's very repeatable. It's better code coverage after you get all the tests written because you're hopefully going to be covering things that maybe the QA person doesn't even know exists in the code. You wrote the code. You know what's in there. You should know what you need to test. Regression testing. Much faster because what are you doing? You're just running a series of tests. You're not having to have a human go through, log in, try to get to where they need to do the testing. That takes time. This is fast because it's just code testing other code. Also, you can automate the setup and the teardown. So these are some great advantages to doing automated unit testing. There are some disadvantages, and the number one being it takes more time up front because you as a developer not only have to write your code to get the application done, but you also have to write the unit tests for those. Also, the tests are really only as good as the developer who develops the tests. So it's very important you pay attention to all of the pieces of code you need to test. Also, it's harder to test UI. For that, you still, unfortunately, kind of need a human a lot of times these days. So which approach should you use? Well, I always think a combination of both is probably the best. You need the QA department working with the developers. You both will help create unit tests together, because the QA people will think of things the developers can't think of, and the developers will see things in the code that the QA people may not know about. They can also help with setup and teardown, and help with UI testing. So I really like this combination of both.